There is a strange feeling that many people know, but few can explain. It is the feeling of being busy, even when there is nothing urgent happening. You look around, the house is quiet, work is under control, your phone is not ringing, no one is demanding anything from you, and yet, your mind keeps working as if there is something important to solve, as if there is something pending, as if you are forgetting something, as if a problem is hidden, waiting to appear. And that creates a very specific kind of discomfort. It is not fear, it is not intense anxiety, it is not panic. It is an internal busyness, a constant activity, a mental movement that does not slow down, a feeling that your mind is always on, always thinking, always analyzing, always reviewing, even when nothing is wrong. Maybe you recognize this. You finish your day. The tasks were completed. The conversations happened. Nothing went out of control. Nothing went wrong. Nothing needs to be solved. And still, your mind remains busy, thinking about what might happen tomorrow, remembering something you said earlier, imagining possibilities that may never happen, creating scenarios that do not exist, reviewing decisions that were already made. It is as if your mind is looking for work, even when there is no work. And that is the part that confuses people. Because when the mind stays busy without a clear reason, a quiet question begins to appear. Why can't I relax? Why won't my mind slow down? Why do I keep thinking? Even when everything is fine. Is there something wrong with me? Am I overreacting? Do I not know how to rest? But here is something important. A busy mind is not always reacting to a real problem. Sometimes, it is reacting to a habit, a learned pattern, a way of functioning that became automatic. And that completely changes how you understand what is happening inside you, because your mind is not busy because you are weak. It is not busy because you are failing. It is not busy because you lost control. Most of the time, your mind is busy because it learned to stay busy. It learned to observe. It learned to monitor. It learned to anticipate. It learned to prepare, even when nothing urgent is happening. And to understand this, we need to look at a very basic function of the human brain. The function of prediction. The human brain was not designed only to react to the present. It was designed to anticipate the future, to imagine possibilities, to identify risks before they happen, to prevent problems before they arise. That was extremely useful throughout history. Imagine an unpredictable environment, constant changes, unexpected dangers, risks appearing suddenly. In that kind of environment, a mind that thinks ahead, observes ahead, and prepares ahead has a better chance of keeping a person safe. So the brain developed an efficient system. It started looking for signals, signals of change, signals of risk, signals of uncertainty, signals that something might go wrong. And that system is still running today, even though the world has changed, even though the risks are different, even though most threats are no longer physical. Today, the challenges are more subtle. Responsibilities, decisions, relationships, expectations, uncertainty, possibilities. And the brain responds to these things in the same way it once responded to ancient dangers. It observes, it analyzes, it calculates, it imagines, it prepares. And when this system stays active for too long, the mind enters a specific state, a state of constant busyness, not because there is a problem, but because there is an expectation that a problem might appear, and that expectation keeps the mind running, even when everything is calm. That is why you can be sitting in silence and still feel your mind busy. You can be resting and still feel thoughts appearing. You can be in a peaceful moment and still feel the sensation that you need to do something. This busyness is not random. It is a reflection of vigilance, a form of preparation, an attempt to avoid surprises. And that explains why the mind keeps working even when there is no clear task. It is not responding to the present. It is trying to predict the future, trying to stay ready, trying to make sure nothing is forgotten, trying to make sure nothing gets out of control. And there is an important detail here. The mind does not need a real problem to stay busy. It only needs uncertainty. And modern life is full of uncertainty. Small decisions, small responsibilities, small possibilities, simple things, but enough to keep the system active. You send a message and start thinking about the reply. You make a decision and begin wondering if it was the right one. You finish a task and mentally review what could have been different. None of this is urgent. None of this is dangerous. But each of these situations creates a small signal of attention, a small invitation for the mind to keep working. And when these signals accumulate, the mind remains busy, not dramatically, but continuously, like an engine idling, running all the time, even when the car is not moving. This kind of mental busyness is quiet, subtle, but persistent. You can be talking to someone and still feel parallel thoughts running. You can be watching a movie and still feel your mind analyzing things. You can be trying to rest and still feel a constant internal activity. And that creates a very specific feeling, the feeling that your mind is never completely off, never fully empty, never truly at rest. And that leads many people to believe something is wrong, that the mind should stop, that thoughts should disappear, that silence should be automatic. But the human brain does not work that way. Thinking is natural, observing is natural, anticipating is natural. What changes is the intensity, the rhythm, the frequency. And when the mind stays busy all the time, it does not mean it is broken. It means it is used to staying active, used to functioning continuously, used to maintaining constant attention. That habit can form gradually, during periods of pressure, during times of responsibility, during phases of adjustment, during situations that require vigilance. In those moments, keeping the mind active is useful. It helps prevent mistakes. It helps maintain control. It helps manage challenges. But when the period passes, the pattern can remain. The mind keeps running at the same pace, even when the situation has changed, even when the environment becomes more stable, even when there is no longer urgency. And that creates a paradoxical feeling. Life is calm, but the mind stays busy. The day is light, but thoughts keep appearing. The environment is safe, but attention remains active. It is as if the system never received the message that it can slow down. And that happens because the brain learns through repetition, not through explanation, not through logic, not through willpower. If the mind spent a long time operating at a fast pace, it learns that this pace is normal. It begins to treat constant activity as the standard. And when the pace decreases, discomfort appears, a sense that something is missing, a subtle restlessness, a need to check, a desire to think about something, not because there is a problem, but because the mind is used to being busy. And here's an important point. A busy mind is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of adaptation. A system that learned to function efficiently, a system that tries to maintain control, a system that tries to ensure safety. But sometimes, it keeps running longer than necessary, and that can create a quiet cycle. The more the mind stays busy, the more it gets used to being busy. The more it gets used to it, the harder it seems to slow down. The harder it seems to slow down, the more it keeps running. And that cycle can continue for a long time, without crisis, without collapse, without dramatic signs, just a constant busyness, a continuous mental activity, a feeling that the mind is always working, even when there is no work. And maybe the most useful question is not, how do I make my mind stop? Maybe the better question is, why did my mind learn to stay busy? That question opens a new perspective. It shifts the focus from control to understanding, from judgment to curiosity, from frustration to awareness. And when you start to understand the reason, something changes. You realize that the mind is not creating problems. It is trying to prevent problems. It is trying to prepare. It is trying to maintain order. It is trying to maintain predictability. It is trying to maintain safety, and that reduces the sense of conflict. You stop fighting your thoughts. You stop trying to silence your mind. You stop blaming yourself for not being able to relax. You begin to observe, to recognize, to accept the natural functioning of the system. And that shift is subtle, but powerful, because when there is understanding, there is room for change. The mind begins to realize that not every situation requires attention. Not every possibility requires analysis. Not every uncertainty requires preparation. And gradually, the pace begins to slow, not abruptly, not by force, but naturally. Activity continues, but with less urgency. Thoughts continue, but with less pressure. Attention continues, but with less tension. And that creates a new kind of experience, a mind that still functions, but does not need to work all the time. A mind that still observes, but does not need to analyze every detail. A mind that still thinks, but can rest between one thought and the next. That mental rest does not mean the absence of thoughts. It means space. It means pause. It means flexibility. It means freedom to not react immediately to every idea that appears. And when that space appears, the sense of busyness begins to decrease. You notice moments of silence, small intervals, brief pauses, and those moments become more frequent, more natural, more accessible. Until one day, you notice something simple. Your mind still thinks, but it does not rush. Your mind still observes, but it does not cling. Your mind still works, but it is not busy all the time. And that changes your relationship with your own thoughts. You stop seeing the mind as an enemy. You stop seeing mental activity as a problem. You begin to see the mind as a system that learns, a system that adapts, a system that can change. And that change begins with a simple idea. A busy mind does not need to be fought. It needs to be understood. Because when you understand why the mind is busy, the busyness loses intensity. When you understand the mechanism, the discomfort decreases. When you understand the pattern, space opens for something new, and that something new is not absolute silence, not emptiness, not the absence of thoughts. It is calm, it is stability, it is clarity. It is the feeling that the mind can function without needing to work all the time. But there is an important detail. A mind that stays busy for too long consumes energy. Even if you do not notice, even if there is no physical effort, even if the day was calm, maintaining constant attention requires resources. Maintaining constant vigilance requires energy. Maintaining constant analysis requires mental capacity. And when this process repeats for days, weeks, months, something begins to happen. Energy decreases. Focus becomes unstable. Patience shortens. Motivation weakens. And a different feeling begins to appear. Not just busyness, but wear. Not just activity, but heaviness. Not just thinking, but effort. And many people interpret this in the wrong way. They believe they are failing, that they are becoming weak, that they have lost their strength. But in reality, there may be another explanation. Maybe the mind is not failing. Maybe it is overloaded. Maybe it stayed busy for so long that it began to consume more energy than it should. Maybe the system worked without pause for too long. And when a system works continuously, the natural result is exhaustion, not because of weakness, not because of inability, but because of prolonged use. And that leads us to an important question. What happens when the mind stays busy for too long? What happens when the system remains active, even when there is no urgency? What happens when vigilance becomes constant? The answer does not appear all at once. It shows up slowly, quietly, gradually, but it shows up. First as mild tiredness, then as difficulty focusing, then as a sense of mental heaviness, then as a lack of emotional energy. And at that moment, many people begin to worry. They believe they are losing strength, that they are becoming weak, that they are no longer capable. But maybe there is another way to understand this. Maybe it is not weakness. Maybe it is consequence. a consequence of a mind that stayed busy for too long, a consequence of a system that kept working continuously, a consequence of vigilance that was never interrupted. And this is exactly where a new understanding begins, an understanding that changes how you see your own mental state. Because sometimes, the problem is not lack of strength, it is not lack of discipline, it is not lack of ability. Sometimes, the problem is too much activity, too much busyness, too much functioning. And that brings us to the next step in this conversation. If the mind can stay busy for so long, if vigilance can consume energy silently, if constant mental activity can create gradual wear, then maybe the question is not, why is my mind busy? Maybe the question is, what happens when this busyness lasts too long? And that is an important question, because the answer reveals something many people do not realize. You are not weak. You have not lost your ability. You are not failing. Maybe you are mentally exhausted, and that is exactly what we are going to explore in the next video.